All right, so puzzle me this. The creation story describes Adam and Eve as having three sons after they're expelled from the Garden of Eden. We're then told that both Cain and Seth have children. If this is the beginning of humanity, how did it happen? These are the questions I asked in Sunday school that nobody was happy about. Even if they had daughters, which is insinuated later on that he had many children, we know today that the blending of DNA from close relatives doesn't produce good results. As I thought about this, I said, perhaps that helps explain why it's taken so long, especially in those early years, for us to continue to grow and evolve and move through these levels as we're looking at it. In fact, if you look at this picture and we look at the time that it took to evolve from one level to another in spiral dynamics, it's remarkable now how quickly these upper levels are coming into being. The first evolution takes place over a couple 100,000 years, and then it's just 25,000 years. Then the window closes to just 7,000, 2,400, and 300 years ago at the level of green. So when that daily word just talked about how things seem to be changing at such a rapid pace, this model might help give us some insight into why at least it feels that way to all of us. We're several weeks into our series where we're exploring the Bible through the color lens of the spiral dynamics model. It's a way to understand and to see in a broad spectrum the values and the beliefs of our humanity over time, and also to look at the challenges that showed up through each evolutionary stage that we've gone through, and then what developed in order to address those challenges. You know, this is one of those series where watching the first week really will be helpful if you missed that, because each week is building upon the other. And you're in luck if you haven't had a chance to watch it, because out on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, you can go back and catch up on those. We've explored initially, this is really being loud. I mean, like noisy. All right, I'm going to try it here and see what happens. If not, I'll switch over. We've explored that first week the level of beige, which was really all about survival. It was about getting from one day to the next without getting eaten or without getting killed by one of the other people trying to survive. And then we explored the purple level, where life was focused on rituals that they believed would keep the gods happy and keep the tribe as they started to band together for greater safety, safe and warm. Last week, we looked at the red level. This was a time when individual power rose, when this idea of I can do what I want to do and I'm not dependent upon anybody else showed up in our makeup, in our human makeup. It's the time when now science is telling us different parts of our brain were developing, and this idea of an ego, this idea of a separate self was really coming into the awareness. And so in this period of time, and we see a lot of it in the Old Testament of the Bible for sure, the main value was, you know, if you've got the strength, if you've got the power, then you can do whatever you want to do. Might makes right is one of those phrases that we often use today to describe it, where it was more about looking out for number one than the good of the group. And after thousands of years of this constant violence and death, this desire for peace rose up in such a way where society, where humanity started to change once again. And the era of law and order came into being, where there was a set of rules, and the idea was that if everyone would agree to abide by those set of rules, then there could be a level of peace. There could be a level of even growth because there would be that cooperation amongst the group of people there. And it went back to a sense of doing something for the good of the group rather than for the good of oneself. In the blue level, as you can see up here too, it values this idea of righteous living, of living in a way that is acceptable in the eyes of God. In this period of time, a part of our human makeup, our aspect of our ego, was that now, in addition to shame, which had before been the only real negative emotion other than anger and hate, we have this idea of guilt and unworthiness show up in our mind's eye. We move back to valuing the collective and are willing, at least at some level, to sacrifice part of our good for the divine plan. We're willing to step in and do what's right if it is part of what we understand God wants us to do. In the Old Testament, we see different writers reflected by different periods. And I'm not going to get into all the J writer and the P writers, but it helps explain while there's different versions of the same events that happen. We see that happen in the New Testament too, where you see the same events described slightly differently. Well, the same is true in the Old Testament, and it's simply different writers at different periods of time feeling a different emphasis is needed for the people that they are trying to support in their own religious practices. There's different versions of Genesis. There's slightly different versions of Noah and the ark and that event that did a reset, according to the Old Testament, on what God would allow human beings to unfold into. And then there's also even two slightly different versions of the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments were the first rise of this idea of laws. That we've got to have some basic agreements here in order for each civilization to grow and to thrive. And while they're similar, there's some distinct differences, I think, that help reflect this new understanding, this new way of living in this time of blue values. The one commandment that's in there, it's one of the, I think it's the fourth commandment. It says, remember, which defining remember is to think about. So remember is to think about the Sabbath. And it goes on to say, even your livestock and your slaves should participate in this because this is the day that God rested. This was the seventh day. God rested, so we should too. In Deuteronomy, where these 10 commandments show up again and are described, that same commandment starts with observe. And observe, the definition at least understood at that time out of the Greek and Hebrew versions, was to conform one's actions or to practice. So instead of just remembering, we're now to practice the Sabbath. We are to do what's proper to do on the Sabbath. And then it goes on to say that the reason we do this is not because that was the day that God rested, but it was the day that the Israelites were delivered from slavery from the Egyptians. And so because they were delivered, it is now their moral duty to observe, to be present, to practice, and to give thanks for that delivery. As these rewrites unfold over hundreds of years, we can see how there is a new understanding of God that arises. This blue God is now a God of righteousness. This blue God is a just God that would reward those who obey the laws and punish those. So it's not random punishment, it is directed rewards and punishment based on behavior, based on how well they abided by the laws in place. And it developed a very strict code of ethics. And so now what was proper, what was right, what was good were all intermeshed with these laws that were coming into being. And we also see blue arise in many other aspects of the Old Testament. We see this idea that law and order, especially in the later years, also, in order to be effective, have to be tempered with wisdom. And probably the greatest story of wisdom is one with King Solomon. And I'm guessing any of you who went to Sunday school probably heard this story. But it comes out of the book of Kings when it says that two women come to Solomon, to both claiming that the baby is theirs. They have a story that they say is true for the other one, that they were both the only ones in the household. They both had babies around the same time. And then one night, a mother rolled over and suffocated her child by mistake, and then got up and swapped the babies. This was the story. And both mothers were claiming that they were the mother of the baby that had survived. How to decide such a thing when there are no other witnesses, there are no other ways to discern what the truth is. So King Solomon gets this brilliant idea to ask for a sword and said, I'm going to cut the baby in half and you can just split the baby because that's the fairest thing to do. Well, of course, the mother, the true mother of the baby, says, no, don't do that. Let the other woman have the baby rather than harm come to the baby that was hers. And then she gets the truth comes out and she gets to reclaim her child. Today, some might call it a divine idea, or we might, in unity, call it intuitive guidance. That information that comes to us that we don't always know where it comes from, but if we're willing to follow it, will allow us to navigate through those tricky situations in ways that simply thinking about it or our ego's judgment of it can't quite navigate. Accessing something beyond the law in order to allow us to see things beyond just our worldly eyes was necessary in order for law and order to be fair and equitable for everyone. The ego is often in that place of judgment, and it only can judge based on what it knows, and it's often incorrect in its perspective of the situation. So even as this idea of following the laws, following the rules became more and more valued in this society, in this time of our human evolution, it doesn't mean that some of our red aspects didn't go away. In fact, there was a lot of red going on. If you look at how the law and order judgments are handed out, it was still very much in an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of energy. If you broke the law and you stole something, you weren't going to get just a little bit of punishment. You were likely to get your hand cut off as a way to bring the scales back into balance. So there's a lot of ways in which blue and red become intertwined together. And I'm guessing in some ways we still see that happening in our world. Even as we struggle to find that place of right balance, that place of equity, that place of love and inclusion for everyone, without wisdom, without compassion, our justice system is often not just. It's only just to the extent that it can tap into the facts versus sometimes what's needed is the wisdom and the wisdom of the heart. Prayer and meditation have often been the way in our evolution that we have been able to cultivate what I call the wisdom of the heart, what some might call that intuitive, others might call wisdom. Wisdom comes out of a clarity of an uncluttered mind and can also be present and can expand when we are awakened to an inner experience of an outer activity, when we can see something more clearly that's going on around us from the lens of our inner wisdom. And oftentimes, the place that we can tap into that is not when we're busy in the activities of our days, but when we get quiet. It helps to reset those external judgments and that sometimes rigid and harshness that comes out of the blue energy, to see it through a greater spectrum of colors. So this morning, I'd like for us, if you're willing, to join me to see if we can't tap into our own inner wisdom, especially around something that we might be having a particular judgment around, or that we're just really unclear or we're unsure how to think and engage with something that's happening in our lives. And so I just invite you right where you are right now to take a moment just to bring your awareness back to your physical self, to your body. Just become aware of it being supported by the chair or wherever it is that you might find yourself in this moment. Becoming aware of the breath as it flows naturally and easily in and out of your body. Becoming aware of the thoughts as they're floating across your mind. And becoming aware of the heart that is rhythmically beating in your chest. And see if you can't even imagine that that thinking part of you is slowly sinking down into your heart space, into what mystics and sages have called the wisdom of the heart, when our thinking and feeling natures are connected to something beyond this physical realm. And imagine that you're holding a candle in front of you and just start to look at that flame of the candle as it flickers. See if you can't even hone your attention in on the very tiny blue flame that's right in its center. And in that blue flame, you begin to notice the face of a very kind and loving being. You can feel their sense of kindness and love radiating out of their eyes, their face, their smile. And this wisdom and kindness is being offered to you right now. And the being tells you that you may ask it for any advice about events happening in your life or in the world. Any issue or concern, you can share it and ask for guidance from this divine being. And then just allow yourself to be open to the answer that arises. It might be a thought, could be an image. You might hear something being whispered barely below your hearing perception. Allow yourself to see this situation, this person that you're seeking clarity around in the same way that this wise being sees it. Now imagine yourself following this guidance, taking the action or responding in the way that your clarity now guides you to. And experience this sense of new ways to see and to engage in this challenge. And then slowly begin to bring your attention back, blessing this wise being and giving thanks for this moment in which they were present with you in a conscious way. And know that you can return to this place at any time where help is always ready and available. And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. You know, as with all the levels on this model of spiral dynamics, these values make it possible for us to step in and to engage in new ways with the complexities of life. When we simply rely on that part of us that is taking its input only from our senses, we limit our own ability to create and to grow and to thrive and to change. The blue level of law and order started around 10,000 years ago, and it continues to be the main value system. We can still see it quite clearly, and certainly in certain parts of our world and even in parts of our own country. About 35 to 45% live primarily from this energy of blue. And it asks us to also not just transcend it, but to take the very best that this level has to offer us as we grow, as we have to expand, as our world becomes more and more complex. And without wisdom and compassion, the blue level can become quite rigid. It can be very slow to change. It becomes, if you will, almost institutionalized, so it's difficult. There's a lot of energy that's required for it to shift. And when this begins to happen, we see in our history that there is a rise once again of individuals wanting to break free of this more rigid system, especially when they start to see that there are those who place themselves above these laws that they're asking everyone else to follow, when they abuse their authorities. We see this with the priests in the temple in Jerusalem. We see it in later kingdoms where the ego takes control versus the values that brought that level into being. And in some places, we still see it today. And out of that unrest, orange, the level orange, begins to rise. Once again, it is valuing the individual, and it values drive, it values ingenuity, it values self-reliance. Those are the things that are rewarded now. In fact, it's that orange level. And as we move up these, we'll begin to see them more and more clearly all around us that gives birth to democracy. And we're going to be looking at that in greater depth next week. As I've said before, we don't evolve from one level to another. Rather, we are a blend of all the levels before us and being intermixed with where it is that we're longing to see ourselves move into. the blue values are necessary. They're necessary for our peace. They're necessary for us to be able to engage in a very complex and diverse set of humanity now. And when we can continue to integrate that with wisdom, with compassion, with purpose, and with a reflection of whatever the values are of that society, blue becomes a very foundational part that allows us to even grow into these greater levels. So our invitation this week is to look at how these blue levels are showing up in our own lives and to embrace those values that help us to grow and to continue to embrace change in its ever speeding rate that we're now experiencing it now. It allows us to understand and transcend and include this. And this becomes true, and we are called to do it more rapidly with each level that we move through. This longing for peace, this longing for connection with the divine has been with us long before we could articulate it. And I imagine that if you would have told the people living 5,000 years ago how life would be different in the future, how life might look at this time in our human evolution, they would have said it was impossible. Just as sometimes we try and imagine the future and it seems almost impossible to us. But much like today, it's difficult. It is difficult as we are stretched to transcend the challenges, that the problems that this new continuing changing world brings to us. And yet, just as the people dreamed long ago, if we continue to hold and to know and to dream that impossible dream, where we're going, we'll be at that place where we long in our hearts, that one of peace, and that one where we know God is right in the midst. It's a journey worth taking. Hope you'll join us. Well, it is our opportunity now to bless the gifts that flow in and through this ministry. We are not doing a formal offertory collection until we move back into the sanctuary, which is going to happen someday. It's the way I feel right now. I get excited and then I have to get patient again. So it's unfolding. It's just unfolding at a slower pace than I would like. But we are grateful for the many ways in which we are supported through your time, through your talents, through your treasure. And we are so grateful for the ways that we can both receive and then share. We tithe 10% out of all that comes into our ministry back out into the community to support both the Unity Movement and other community local groups around here. So we're grateful for the ways that we get to not only bless you, but take part of what you give and bless the greater community around us. There's 2 baskets here to receive your offering for those who are here in person. And there's also a little basket by them that has affirmations that if you want to select one and take with you, it's there to bless you for this week. And we also invite those who are watching us through our live stream to go to our website, centerofunity.org, and go to the Give page. You can share your gifts there as well as receive an affirmation just by scrolling a little further down the screen. So let us take these gifts or the energy of those, if we give through the automatic contribution program, and join and bless them together. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, Father, Mother God.
This morning, why don't we go ahead and stand up? This morning, we're going to do our peace song, and this is where we end our service, and we all stand and we do this peace song. And I was thinking this morning, you know what? We should do this a little differently, because there's no secret that there is conflict in the world right now. You know, I mean, there's things going over on Ukraine kind of thing it's kind of scary. I mean, there's real conflict. But instead of this just singing this warm kind of fuzzy song we're going to sing about peace on earth, let us do it as a prayer this morning. Let us do it with the energy that goes out and makes a difference. The Bible says where two or more people agree on anything, I'll give it to you. So this morning, let's all agree as we sing this song. On earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, family all are we. Let me walk with my family in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
And so as we go into this week, allowing our hearts to be that guide of wisdom and compassion in all that we do and see, we go knowing our prayer for protection together. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.